Hi, welcome back to Highly Educated. I'm AJ Fabrizio, and this is Matt Guenther. Matt, you've been on Reddit this week, right?
Yeah, AJ, it's been a lot of fun actually engaging with the Reddit communities, trying to learn more about what the consumer knows or doesn't know about the cannabis industry and these cannabis-related products. So I got a bunch of interesting questions, and I had one I wanted to discuss with you in public so we can get to the bottom of all this. The question involved edibles and how edibles have changed over the past couple of years and why edibles aren't necessarily as consistent as the inhalation of cannabinoids. So if you're okay, I kind of want to discuss the history of edibles, what the market looks like now and where things are going.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, this is something that's has been relatively common. People are always interested to understand, why is my experience different when I inhale versus I use oral ingestion, 2 of the 6 different routes of administration, right? There's 2 major factors. We're going to oversimplify this, but there are 2 major factors that actually will affect your experience when it comes to these 2 different routes of administration. One is how the body metabolizes those compounds or how it gets into the blood. And 2 is how easily it gets into the blood. So that term is called bioavailability in that case, right?
Nice.
So, specifically with edibles, traditionally, those who would eat a brownie or something like that, you would take these oil-based cannabinoids and you would dissolve them in an oil-based ingredient, like, cooking oil, butter, whatever it might be, right? The problem with that is because your body itself is water-based, oils are pretty inefficiently absorbed. There's a bunch of different factors associated with that chemically, but just understand the same way that if you poured water or oil on top of a glass of water, that oil will not mix into that water. Even if you were to blend it up, that oil will eventually separate itself. Okay.
Exactly.
So in this case, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, not to cut you off there, AJ, but I just want to interrupt to let you know, I told the Reddit community we'd make a video about this. I did take the time to give them just a little bit of history. So you did a great job there with the oil and water and how those 2 don't mix so well. Just so the Reddit community knows, what happens traditionally when you take a normal cannabis-based edible is it passes through almost your entire digestive system without interacting with much of anything until it finally hits your liver, where it is metabolized into many different things, but primarily the 11-hydroxy metabolite of whatever cannabinoid you've ingested. So I did just want to let people know, traditionally, to AJ's point, these products aren't doing much of anything in the body until they hit the liver. And thank you, AJ, for helping to explain why that is.
Yeah, and to expand a little bit more on that, when Matt says that doesn't really interact, like that's partially because of the inefficiency of absorption, and this will dovetail very well into explaining the difference between inhalation and oral ingestion. So whenever you eat something, the first line of defense is your stomach. When it's something that might be a toxin, the acid will break down most anything. So a lot of destruction happens in the stomach acid. But then, like Matt said, once it's absorbed through your intestines or your gut, it goes to the liver. The liver itself is the real, security guard of the body. And what happens is delta-9 THC, when it's absorbed, will actually be metabolized into 11-hydroxy metabolite, as Matt mentioned. And that has a totally different pharmacokinetic effect, or it plays differently on the endocannabinoid system than just delta-9 THC. Now, that compared to inhalation is when you inhale something, it goes directly into the bloodstream and bypasses the liver. Now, obviously, your blood will pass through the liver, and over time, it will be converted to 11-hydroxy metabolite. But for the vast majority of that experience that you're experiencing, the delta-9 THC is still delta-9 THC in the blood. And so one of the cool things that we could talk about also, Matt, is that influences bioavailability is something that we call in science of particle size, basically. So as you had mentioned, historically, people would make edibles and they would have inconsistent. A lot of people have inconsistent experiences, even though they could be identical edibles with identical milligram counts of cannabinoids. Because absorption has so many different variables associated with it, especially when it comes to oils, they could lead to a very inconsistent set of experiences over a long period of time. So a lot of very intelligent people decided that they would attack this and figure out, is there a way for us to create a much more efficient administration method, and B, consistent experience. And one of the cool buzz things or buzzwords that you may see, and I'm sure that they mentioned it in the post, is when you see something called nano emulsification or micro emulsification. Matt, if you want to talk a little bit about what that is and how they engineer that, and I could talk about the different effects of the particle sizes and how they could be absorbed.
Absolutely. Yeah. So to what AJ alluded there, the scientists did a good job in recognizing if they wanted to make these more effective and more consistent, they need to reduce the particle size. And what I'm here to tell you is there's many different ways to do that. So there's no one thing that is happening to these cannabinoids that's allowing them to function more efficiently or consistently in the body. There are surfactant-based technologies, there are cyclodextrins, there's all kinds of different things. And AJ can actually tell you more about those here in a little bit. But what's cool about it is all of these things, while they're prepared differently, the idea behind the solution is the same, which is the user is going to interact with these cannabinoids before they hit the liver. And what that's going to prevent is the biochemical and genetic uniqueness associated with every single individual. That's not going to be able to impact the experience. So what happens with traditional edibles that are metabolized in the liver, everybody has different concentrations of these enzymes in their liver, right? And that means that the onset of the experience, the duration of the experience, and the intensity of the experience will all be different based on the concentration of those enzymes. So what AJ is about to describe now is what happens and how it happens. We ignore the liver and instead have formulated and engineered these cannabinoids to work more effectively with the water-based human body. So AJ, with that, if you'd like to take it away, feel free.
So yeah, and one of the things, so as Matt was alluding to, there are many different ways to actually create these, what we call particle size. But basically what we're doing is, remember when I used that analogy of pouring oil on top of the water, and you kind of have like a glob of oil, right? Just one big droplet that's spread out on the top. Well, these technologies, what we're doing is we're actually taking that droplet and we're making it into, many very small droplets. And it just so happens that when the droplets get below a certain size, they can actually be distributed evenly throughout the water, and they can become stable. And what that allows for is what we consider that we say it becomes distributed in the bulk of the solution. So if you imagine your digestive tract has all this water in it, and you, to be able to absorb these compounds, need to have all these compounds be able to hit the insides of the tissues, or the tissue on the inside of their intestines and other organs to be absorbed. Otherwise, no absorption occurs, right? So what we're doing in this case is we're taking one big droplet and we're turning into many little droplets that then have a higher diffusion rate and are more easily absorbed through the tissues, okay? And as Matt mentioned, I wouldn't say necessarily that there's no interaction that occurs. What actually occurs is you still metabolize it when it gets to your liver, but what we're doing is we're making the process of getting to your liver more efficient. So instead of, like Matt said before, I don't know what the number was for bioavailability of like can of butter or can of oil, but say you're talking about something that's 4% bioavailable. So if you take 100 milligrams of THC, and you only get 4%, you're only absorbing 4 milligrams of it, right? But that variation, maybe sometimes it's only 2%, or sometimes it's 8%. All that data is very inconsistent because of the fact that the oils are so inefficiently absorbed that way. But when you microencapsulate or you nano encapsulate, meaning, make the bubbles, the little droplets, a millionth of a meter or a billionth of a meter, now you've exponentially increased the ability of the body to absorb these compounds. And in some cases, some studies show, one of the companies that I've had a pleasure to work with over the years had done their own research, and they created their own version of this engineering process where they can make a totally vegan process, where they believe that the most efficient way or particle size for their process is 400 micron or 400 nanometers, which is basically saying 400 billionths of a meter or 0.4 millionths of a meter. That in their studies showed that they had an 8-fold increase in bioavailability throughout the bloodstream. So that means that when you're taking 50 milligrams, you're actually absorbing more of those 50 milligrams and you're absorbing them more consistently. And the consistency is really key, because then you as an individual consumer can then titrate your dosage more effectively without irregularities in experience. Because as we've all know, a lot of people have a problem where, like, if you eat a brownie or an edible, you wait an hour, you don't feel anything, and you're like, well, maybe I didn't take enough. And then you take more, and then 15 minutes later, you feel the first round, and you're like, oh no, did I overdo it?
Yeah, it's really tough to plan for your day. Is it going to take 45 minutes, an hour and 45 minutes, 3 hours and 45 minutes? Then how long is it going to last? What AJ has described, and the companies and the scientists working on this, what they've enabled is the consumer to walk in and buy a nano-enhanced gummy or a hemp-derived seltzer, right? Anything that's water-soluble. Anytime you see the term water-soluble, you're going to be encountering a technology that allows the consumer to feel the effects of that cannabinoid many times within 10 to 15 minutes. And the consumer also knows that it's going to be limited to maybe 2 or 3 hours, and not waking up the next day wondering where they are.
And you're right. And a lot of people might not know this, but when I was studying in my master's program, I actually studied specifically how water works as a solvent. And so when you see the term water soluble associated with oils, there should be quotations around it, right? To the human eye, we're making these particles, these droplets so small that you cannot see them. And they will, if done correctly, distribute evenly through the bulk, which are two of the traits of something being soluble. But technically, it is not fully soluble because you still have these little bubbles. So you have these little collections of these oil molecules that are surrounded by these emulsification technologies, right? Yeah. So we call them vesicles in some cases, right? So now let's talk about the difference between that oral ingestion and inhalation, right? Inhalation, as we mentioned, immediately, because of the way that your lungs work, when you inhale, oxygen goes straight from your lungs into your heart, okay? Right into your bloodstream, right? Right into your heart. So that's why you see a much faster onset with these compounds. Oils also, when you will actually coat your lungs. So for instance, if you're combusting plant material, there's a lot of variables associated with that combustion, right? Because you're not just absorbing cannabinoids, or you're not just inhaling cannabinoids, you're also inhaling the combusted plant material on top of that. There's a huge variation in particle size there, right? But because your lungs are so efficient at being able to absorb oxygen, you got to think about it. The only exchange occurs, like I said, on the surface of the tissue. The vast majority, that's why your bronchioles have all these different tree-like structures that are extending throughout your lungs to increase the surface area so that you have more exchange, right? So one of the other cool things that we have found is that there is also an optimal particle size for inhalation. Another study that has been done showed that, the larger particles will actually deposit on, not in the deeper recesses of your lungs. The smallest particles are the ones that actually get the deepest recesses of your lungs and have the most bioavailability and the fastest absorption. And studies show, another study that was also done by that same company, ECS Brands, showed that when you get to 2 microns and smaller for inhalation, you actually see it depositing or being absorbed in the deepest recesses of your lungs, where you can then see, onset within 3 to 5 minutes, which is really interesting compared to your gut. Because as we said before, for your gut, you're talking about a factor of almost 100 smaller, factor of 50 smaller in the gut. for absorption, for optimal absorption. And Matt can even talk about there are other companies that have made particle sizes even smaller than the 400 nanometers that we were talking about previously.
Yeah, I've seen down to 35 nanometers, and other companies even pursuing 18, 15, but wondering if there's actually any benefit to that. Also wondering if you go too small, if you're actually doing more damage than good. That happens a lot in the extraction side of things. Very similar principle in terms of surface area. So just want to let everybody know that the scientists and the companies like AJ alluded to are taking the time to get the right number. It's not just a pursuit of going higher or lower. It's about getting the right number. And we're privileged enough to work with the people that are truly pursuing that.
Yeah. And so for those, I mean, I know we gave a long-winded answer, but the two main factors that we said that will affect your experience, the difference between inhalation versus oral ingestion are A, the way the compounds are metabolized. When you inhale, it goes directly into your bloodstream and then goes through your liver over countless passes through your bloodstream and gets metabolized. And B, bioavailability, which is based off of particle size and solubility. So how easily is that compound absorbed in the tissues associated with getting it into your body? So again, inhalation directly into the bloodstream. And when you eat it, it's got to go through a few more barriers, barriers to entry, you could say, before you actually start to feel the effects. And those barriers each have a profound effect on the absorption rate and what you actually end up getting into your bloodstream, which ultimately correlates to your experience.
Awesome. That's an awesome way to conclude things, kind of give a cohesive and concise explainer of what we covered, because it's important the consumer knows this. It's going to make you more educated walking in the store, making sure you get the product and the experience that you want. So with that, I'd like to thank the community for giving us these questions. I'm going to take the time to make sure we get better questions with each passing week and do our best to sufficiently answer them for you. So AJ, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I always appreciate your expertise. And this is a topic this week that I'm really grateful that you were around, because you certainly nailed it in a way that I don't think anybody else could.
No, Matt, thanks. I always love talking to you about this stuff. And unfortunately, I only make you listen to it. And I want to thank the people on Reddit and anybody, please, guys, any questions you guys have. Matt and I have devoted our lives to learning about these different subjects and trying to make it accessible for individuals, because we want them to have the best experience surrounding this. It changed my life because of my epilepsy, and it's changed Matt's life, and we've seen it change countless other people's lives. So, please don't hesitate. There's no question that's too silly. There's no question that's too advanced. If we don't know it, I'm sure that we know the people who do know it, and we'll make sure that we bring it to you guys in a way that you can understand and hopefully is entertaining. So again, this is Highly Educated. I'm AJ Fabrizio. This is my co-host, Matt Guenther, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks so much.